with old school baits that work, we're kind of taking a step away from the technology takeover of all of bass fishing. Okay, it's all of our lives. I mean, these computers that we have in our hands, that we have in our pockets, I call them phone. Yeah, they have a phone in them, but they are big physical computers that are just tiny. It's unbelievable the stuff that they can do. It's taken over our trucks, our boats, our Wi-Fi. AI is the whole next step of technology. It's really kind of mind-boggling, and that's not why we go fishing. To an extent, we have to use it sometimes, and then I just popped down there that Moore's law suggests technology doubles every 2 years. I think it's even faster than that now, which is kind of crazy. And then the forward facing sonar is what the technology takeover of bass fishing really is what I'm referring to. We didn't talk really hardly at all about that in the first session. So the forward facing sonar, it's really changed what a lot of bait companies are doing, how some people think that they need to fish, and that is not necessarily true. The fishing industry, like I said, was coming out with all these new crazy lures just focused on forward facing sonar. But before we do that, before we go to that kind of conversation, let's go to the next slide. Not so fast. Not so fast, my friends. Let's all be a Randy for a minute here and talk about old school baits, because going backwards and thinking about the original baits that kind of made bass fishing popular, that really were kind of the forefront of what bass fishing is today before any of this technology takeover. And that's what right now, I'm going to just briefly talk about Randy Blockett for a second. I've known Randy a long, long time. He has always thought differently than pretty much everybody in the room that he's around. I think that's cool because it just gives you a different perspective on things. Now, I agree with about 5% of what he says most of the time, but he has a different perspective, and it makes me think about things in a different way. So I think it's fun and cool and all. And yeah, he wants LiveScope banned, but he doesn't even use LiveScope. He just doesn't like the whole thing. So he tries to justify why he doesn't like LiveScope and technology, because he remembers how it was back in the 80s and 90s, and it was awesome and it was fun. And so that's why we're talking about old school baits, because it was awesome and it was fun, and those baits do still work. So just to kind of keep going on that, the bass don't watch videos or they don't read the internet. I've gone snorkeling, I've looked under the water. They don't have the internet down there. The Wi-Fi signal won't go through water. I don't know if y'all knew that or not, but seriously, it won't. Wi-Fi signals will not go through the water. Neither will Bluetooth. The buzzbait is one of my other old school favorite baits. And from fishing for 25 years and really being involved, it seemed like when I came into the sport, buzzbaits were kind of like, it's okay. There's like other baits were more trendy. Popar was real popular. Zero Spook was real popular. The buzzbait was not as popular. And then there's been a research in the 90s, like early 90s and 80s, the buzzbait was a big deal. And then in the last 6, 8, 10 years, it's like there's been this resurgence of the buzzbait due to guys taking the skirts off and putting toads on the back like that right there. There's been a big resurgence of people throwing these kind of buzz baits and have a lot of really good finishes. I mean, a lot of big tournaments have been won with those kind of buzz baits. They just take a regular buzz bait and add the skirt off. Now they have ones designed just for the toads. That's been kind of a new movement. I think that's pretty cool that they do that trend has come back, because the buzz bait is so much fun to fish. It is one of my favorite ways to catch one. If I could go anywhere and be like, all right, what's one of your most favorite ways to catch it? Buzz bait's got to be one, because man, when they hit it, it looks like somebody threw a cinder block in the lake. That's what it looks like when they hit it typically. The next one is the spinnerbait. I love fishing a spinnerbait. It is a lot of fun. It's one of the first bass baits that I got confidence in outside of a plastic worm. I grew up fishing ponds. I didn't grow up fishing like the big lakes or Hartwell or anything like that. I grew up fishing ponds, and the spinnerbait was one of the first non-worm baits that I started to fish and got confidence in pretty quick, and just learned to love it, understand it, and then really kind of get into what makes them bite it. You know, I was going to tell you, you know, kind of like when to throw a spinnerbait, and I'll tell you the Wally Zuba story. Wally is a angler from North Carolina, and when I was probably, I don't know, 17 or something like that, I was fishing co-angler, and we had a tournament on Bugs Island Lake, and it was a little bit flooded. Water was dirty, kind of perfect scenario for fishing a spinnerbait. And Wally was the first guy that I'd ever fished with that I remember that was like on a different level than anybody else I'd ever fished with a spinnerbait. And that hog collar you see there, the double blade one, not the triple blade, but the one with the 2 Colorados on it, that might have been the exact, not the exact one, but the same exact model that Wally was fishing when I fished with him. And dude, he would take that thing and zing it in between like a little gap in the bushes, zing it in there, and then just slow roll it right through there. And he put a damn hurting on him that day. He was in the top 5. I don't remember his exact weight or anything, but he was in the top 5. He probably caught 15 or 20 keepers that day, and it seemed like every fish he caught was 2.5 to 4 pounds. I mean, he was just absolutely putting on a clinic, and a lot of it was his casting accuracy and how he would work that thing through those flooded bushes. So that was really like one of my first, because I'd been fishing a spinnerbait, you know, for 4 or 5 years pretty intently, and I thought I knew what I was doing. And then I get with him, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. That's how you fish a spinnerbait. And it just kind of opened my eyes that there's things you can do to get to the next level. And one of the things, aside from the casting accuracy that he was doing, something that I was kind of aware of was that when you're reeling that spinnerbait, you know, like Brandon was talking earlier about using your reel to make that bait jump and make it dart the other way. A spinnerbait, as we know, won't do that. So one of the good things you can do with a spinnerbait is you can just I just like to pull the rod down, like just make it load up and then unload. And what that does is it makes the skirt tighten up, and then it makes it flare out. And that little skirt flare is something that will absolutely trigger a lot of bass to bite. You get it past that or near that log, you get it near that bush or whatever. Just give that little rod pump like that, and you'll cause the whole thing to kind of compact and come back out. That skirt flare, next thing you know, bam. Those old school techniques, and then integrate them with the new technology. I think that's kind of where it's at. You know, technology is not needed. All that stuff is not needed to go catch a bass. These old school baits are tried and true. They will work. You don't, you know, all these new baits clutter in the market. Don't get confused. And then I think you put these 5 techniques that I just went through, I will put those up against any other 5 techniques you want to name, as far as track record, big bass, tournament performance, any of that kind of stuff.
Big UTV is the only way to learn to bass fish.